The countdown is counting days. Kiev, Ukraine that is preparing for a new phase of the conflict. The negotiations over Ukraine are approaching their final stage. The fate of the main conflict in Europe may be decided literally in the coming days. Whatever happens in this short period of time, the confrontation will certainly not be the same again. Donald Trump is doing everything to turn this page, at least for the United States. For the American president, the situation is almost a win-win. An outcome of the negotiations will be a success for him. Of course, the most preferable option for him would be a peace agreement. This, in fact, would be accompanied by an agreement on Ukrainian minerals, and this agreement is precisely the main incentive for him to continue to pressure Zelensky to accept reality. What does this offer Trump? For him, it would be the first significant victory after his re-election. This is especially important given that on other fronts, in negotiations with Iran, in the confrontation with China, and in trade wars with the rest of the world, the results are currently difficult to boast about. At the same time, his ambitions for the new Nobel Peace Prize would gain a solid justification. A pleasant bonus, although this factor is not so important for him. Much more important, however, are these conditions on the domestic American political scene. By achieving peace in Ukraine and acquiring its resources, Trump will be able to free his hands for a long time. The current war is his rhetoric, and his rhetoric is Joe Biden's war, a poorly fought war that should not have happened, but was generously financed with money from American taxpayers' pockets, most of which was given to the Ukrainians for almost nothing. Of course, some of the aid was given in the form of loans, but let's be honest, Americans would not see the return of these loans anytime soon, even in the best case scenario. Trump, on the other hand, can now claim that he not only ended the war, but did so without spending a single dollar. Instead, he secured the minerals of the second largest country in Europe. In short, Biden wasted billions of the budget on an obviously lost cause, while Trump not only restored them but multiplied them for the Americans. Everything would be fine, except that Kiev, Ukraine that is doing everything to prevent this scenario from happening. First, the Ukrainian armed forces, VSU, are acting as if there were no agreements to refrain from attacking energy infrastructure, and then Kiev is doing everything it can to derail the Easter truce, and yesterday Major General Yaroslav Moskalik, deputy head of the main operations directorate of the Russian General Staff, is no longer with us, exactly on the day of Vitkov's visit to Moscow. And some of Kiev's actions are even directed at Trump personally. First, Zelensky travels to Washington and cancels the signing of the agreement. That was already considered a given. Almost 2 months pass, the terms of the middle agreement become even worse, but the sides manage to move forward with negotiations on the conflict. And this week, before the essentially decisive visit to London, Zelensky is again doing everything to make diplomacy fail. He declares that Ukraine will never give up Crimea, while the Kiev delegation traveling to Britain is authorized to agree only on a ceasefire and nothing more. Trump, such provocative behavior, repeated twice, obviously did not like it. Therefore, in his interview with Time magazine, he imposed a public punishment, quote-unquote, on Ukraine. The conflict began when the Ukrainian authorities, started talking about joining NATO. If this issue had not been raised, there was a much greater chance that it would not have started at all, the American president says. In other words, the responsibility for what happens lies with Ukraine. For us, this is of course not news, and the reason was not the only one, but to imagine half a year ago that someone in the West would admit that Kiev is trying in vain to present itself as a victim was unthinkable. And this, of course, is a great victory for Russian diplomacy. But Trump does not stop there. He already cites information that had leaked to the media. Crimea will remain part of Russia. In essence, this is already an official recognition of Russian sovereignty over the peninsula of Crimea, even before the negotiations are completed. And that's not all, though. I don't think Ukraine will ever be able to join NATO, the American president adds. In just one interview, he gave Zelensky 3 slaps to the face. Kiev tried to respond, but the statement of the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry, which claims that there is no question of recognizing their territories as Russian and that no one has a right to veto Ukraine's accession to any coalitions or associations, looks simply ridiculous. Trump does not need Zelensky's permission to recognize Crimea as being Russian, and denying Ukraine's accession to NATO can be done by almost anyone, and there is no doubt about it, the United States certainly has the right to veto this issue. And thus the brilliancy and poverty of Krivorig's diplomats in this situation really seems comical. Compared to them, even the statements of Klitschko, who noted that Ukraine will probably have to give up some territories, seem like an example of logic. This is very sad news for Ukrainians. However, many of them, it seems, have difficulty perceiving it. My son Dmitry passed 9 months ago defending Ukraine. Crimea will always be ours and we will never give it up, reports the British Times, quoting the words of the mother of the Ukrainian soldier. Well, Zelensky is doing everything to ensure that there are as many such Dmitrys and such mothers in Ukraine as possible, it seems. And this is by Ria Novostian, translated for you. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.